You're listening to Health Innovators, a podcast and video show about the leaders, influencers, and early adopters who are shaping the future of healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Roxy Mooney. Welcome back, Health Innovators. On today's episode, I have Jason Mellad with me, and he is the co-founder of Start Codon. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thank you, Roxy. Happy to be here.
It is so awesome to speak with you again. So if you could, for our listeners, if you could, and viewers, if you could just tell everyone a little bit about yourself, what you do, to give us some context for today's conversation.
Sure. So I am originally from Louisiana, and I grew up there, went to school there, ended up, it's the place to be. Went to school at Tulane University in New Orleans, which I adore and still consider Louisiana and New Orleans to be home. But I was awarded a Marshall Scholarship to study in the UK in the University of Cambridge in 2004, and I've been here pretty much ever since. Decided I did not want to be an academic, came here to do my PhD in medicine, moved into industry, and now I run an accelerator called Start Codon, based here in Cambridge, where we are trying to find the most innovative and high potential early stage life science startups, therapeutics, diagnostics, digital health, or med tech, get them funded, give them advice and guidance, and help them to really thrive.
So what year did you start that?
So we officially started in 2019, but our first investments were last year, right before the pandemic hit in February 2020.
Okay. So is the UK market as saturated with accelerators like we are in the US?
Yes and no. So there's something like 1,000 accelerators in the UK market. It's a relatively small country, but what we call an accelerator here is not how we refer to them in the States. Most accelerators in the States invest for equity, or they provide some kind of financial compensation. In the UK, a lot of programs that are just incubator space, or maybe a bit of mentorship, will call themselves an accelerator. So there are not many that have funds to invest in companies, but there are loads of guidance and incubator space programs here.
And is that what makes the work that you guys do different?
It is. We felt that there was a gap in the market, and we wanted to bring together what we felt were the kind of stewards and exceptional talent of the Cambridge biotech ecosystem, which is the leading hub in Europe, to not only kind of hone it so anybody could have access, but really to open access outside of Cambridge. So if you're not physically living here, if you're in Bristol or Edinburgh, wherever you are in the UK, you can say, well, I wish I could get access to all that talent in Cambridge. We could be that conduit for them. So we were hoping to kind of increase the number of spin-outs from across the UK, but using the talent that we have in Cambridge to do so.
That's great. So how is it going? Obviously, riding the roller coaster of healthcare innovation can be really exciting. So what's the journey been like so far for you?
It's been fantastic. I mean, this really is my dream job. When I left my previous company, Cambridge Epigenetics, where I was there for 6 years, and I still adore them. I'm actually wearing a jumper for them as we speak. Shout out to Cambridge Epigenetics. But when I left, it had to be for something incredible. And so the opportunity, particularly in the UK, where there's a real need to support more spin-outs, especially in the healthcare space, has been fantastic. It's been a roller coaster in a lot of different ways. We just got started right before the pandemic hit, so we went virtual. Originally, we were planning on having a physical space and we'd all be there together and it would be wonderful. And then after 2 weeks, we went, go home, lockdown. So we've now had 9 companies come through. We're expecting another 5 to start with us in March, April time. And in many cases, I haven't met them in person. So that's been a whole new concept. But also going through this pandemic, I think if we can say positive things come from it, there's always positivity you can find. There's a renewed focus on healthcare. So there's a lot of interest from investors of backing these companies and providing guidance. So I think now's the perfect time in a way if you have a solution in the healthcare space to be starting, but it has been quite a roller coaster.
Yeah. So obviously there's multiple stages of an innovation's life cycle and a company's life cycle. What made you pick startups, early stage startups?
I think there's a significant
Besides being insane.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. And I love it. It's like, I just love that adrenaline rush. I love getting things started. I think there are people who, if you could look at it in 3 phases, there are people who are really good at starting things, and the people who are great at the kind of scale and maintenance, and then maybe people who are good at the tail end when you're kind of going for an exit of some sort. I very much thrive at the beginning. I'm like, right, you've got an idea. Let's sit down, let's map it out. What resources do you need? This is fantastic. What do we need to do? That's what makes me really excited and happy. And I get to do it again and again and again. And then hopefully help those companies and opportunities figure out what they need for the next stage and say, which investors do you need for phase 2? You've done the seed stage. What about the kind of scale up and growth phase? What kind of leadership do you need? What kind of business plan do you need for that phase? So I know where I really thrive and shine. And my co-founder and my other team members, we're all of a similar ilk. We really like that challenge of getting something started, getting it off the ground and building the foundation. And then we're trying to find partners to take on the next piece and help them go to the next phase of growth.
So in your work, what are the biggest challenges that the companies that you're working with or the innovators that you're working with that they're facing maybe before the pandemic, or, maybe how that's changed or in what's happening today?
Yeah, I think that there may be some operational challenges people have faced with the pandemic. There was a bit of reluctance to invest in new companies towards the beginning of the lockdown last year. But as we suspected, from September, everybody went the complete opposite. They said, we need to deploy our capital. We've been hunkered down and being very risk averse, but now we're like, we need to invest. So it's been a flurry of opportunities from that standpoint. But I would say that the early stage companies, they really need to understand that it's not about the tech, it's about a product solution for an unmet need. So they need a lot of help understanding and mapping out that need, figuring out what product solution they'll develop, as opposed to just focusing on, I've got a great piece of tech, I've published a great Nature paper, a Cell paper, isn't that wonderful? It's like, that's nice, but nobody cares about that in the business world.
Right.
What lives are you saving? What costs are you reducing? How are you, like, what are you actually, what's the problem you're solving? And then to understand that, there's only so much education you can do. They need team members who can help them execute. And a lot of what we look at are, first-time CEOs or postdocs or professors who've never spun out technology before, and they really know what they know very well. And we can educate them to make them more business savvy, but we can't turn them overnight into a startup CEO. So we need to think about the balance of what the companies are bringing to the table already, assess them, and then help them build their teams, because it's the teams that make for successful companies. Tech comes and goes. The tech you start off with might not be the tech you end up with. You might license something in. So you can't be just about the tech today, but the team. You bring in the right team with experience and that ambition. That's how you make sure these early stage companies can really fly. And that's something that all of our companies are actively trying to find, those team members.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So you've talked a little bit about investing. So you're an investor yourself. So what are the companies that you're looking to invest in? Like, what makes it attractive, especially for these early stage companies where, we know like they might not have a technology built? Is that something that you prefer, to be even earlier stage where they're still ideating, they've got a good idea, but it hasn't even been tested? And then you've got other investors that are looking for something that's been built, that has clinical evidence already developed, and maybe even has some paying customers. So what is the pros and cons of those investment potential, and then what you guys are doing in your firm?
So we very much see that our gap is a little bit further from ideation. Is when you've had proof of concept. So the opportunities we're looking at, either our partners at Roche, Genentech, and Novartis, for example, some of our mentors, give us a very clear understanding of the unmet needs. And then we go and try to find technologies and companies that are addressing those unmet needs. The other side of it is when somebody approaches us with a novel platform, a novel play, and then they say, we've demonstrated there's an unmet need and I've got a solution I'm developing for it. So either way, we're looking for people who have really understood that problem, and they have a solution that we think is compelling and unique, but also has some proof of concept and a reason to believe it'll work. So for example, we've invested in gene editing companies. So they've demonstrated, we know CRISPR, hot topic, but what are you bringing that's new to the table? We have in our portfolio a functional genomics company, an antibody drug conjugate company. So we have a cell therapy company. These are areas that have been trodden before, but we've taken a second look and said, well, people have been in this space, but actually they needed to solve X, Y, and Z problems, and this company is solving those problems. So it'll make it more efficient. It'll bring, save more lives. It'll enable more people to access this platform. That's when we think that's perfect. But that early proof of concept, we invest and we help them achieve the data that they need for the next level of investor. So you might have in vitro data, say some cell lines, and you need to get some mouse data. So we might fund you for the in vivo work. Maybe you have the in vivo data, but you need to do some market research to really hone your business plan. We'll help with that. So we're that intermediate step to then go with them to the investor who will say, I will give you the money to get into the clinic. I'll give you the money to help you bring your product to a clinical trial. Or
So do you think that that gives you an advantage because you are, investing in some of these companies? So you know what you're looking for, you know what the investor market is looking for, and so you're able to help better shape those investor decks. And obviously, all of the work that goes behind the tangible data and business plan development that goes behind the deck, so that they are presenting themselves in a much more effective, compelling way.
I think ultimately it does give us that advantage. I mean, the idea that we're looking for a market pull as opposed to just pushing tech out there. What's the market demand calling for? As well as we know what they want. We very much view ourselves as kind of developing products ourselves. We're almost like a startup. We're lean. We have products, which are the companies we invest in, and we need to make sure that those diamonds in the rough get polished up and positioned appropriately so they can actually carry on and get to the next stage of their growth. I will say, though, that it's riskier. So we have to be very risk tolerant and risk embracing, because a lot of VCs, some are venture building, but many are expecting the hard, that first phase to have been accomplished so they can take on the next phase.
Right.
So there are a lot more opportunities that I think are ultimately viable, but don't have the hand-holding support that we provide that could be feeding into the pipelines of those later stage Series A investors. But it takes an organization like Start Codon to come in early and do that. So as much as we have the advantage, we also are embracing risk a lot more than some of the later stage investors.
Okay, that makes sense. So I think the innovator's mindset is really maybe a domain that we don't talk about as much, or we don't even maybe invest as much time in shaping, right? So we're thinking about the business tools and maybe even the business skills, and like you said, the technology and the business plan, but the innovator mindset, most innovators come with, some vision, some amount of risk, or right, because that's why they're even here to begin with, crazy enough to think that they can change the world with their innovation. But what do you think is really critical for that mindset to make sure that they're resilient, or to make sure that they don't have bias, personal preferences and bias that are integrated into their whole process that could lead them, down the wrong path?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. One of my all-time personal superheroes is my mom in this regard. So I'm going to use her as an example as what I think the innovator mindset is about. She was, like my dad, immigrated to the States many moons ago in the 60s, went to school in Ohio, and then ended up moving to Louisiana. And what's been fascinating is she trained as a social worker, but she has had so many different jobs and hats. She set up businesses, she had a pharmacy, she had a clinic that she was running for her kids. She was selling cosmetics for Mary Kay, cosmetics door to door. And I remember going door to door with her when I was a kid and learning that kind of entrepreneurial hustle that she always had. And she told me,
which is so funny. I sold Avon with my grandmother when I was little in Louisiana.
Well, exactly. See, Louisiana strong. We know, right, Roxy? I mean, we talked about this last time. You know exactly where I'm coming from. But that instills in you from a young age that entrepreneurial mindset. And my mom would always tell me things like, "Don't let where you start dictate where you end up."
Oh no.
And it's so true. Roxy, you there? Yeah.
Oh wait.
Okay. So it's all about being Louisiana strong and really understanding what something my mom used to always tell us and show us by example, that you shouldn't let where you start dictate where you end up. Mm. And there's this resilience and this desire to always find improvement. Like, we laugh because the way we communicate when we talk on the phone, she's always like, "Oh, I saw this idea. I bet we could do it better. Oh, here's a business idea." Literally, we WhatsApp each other all the time. "Here's a business idea. That's a business idea. Oh, Uber's doing this. Couldn't they do it this way?" And it's fun. It's a joke that we have that we're always trying to, come up with something that we could be selling or doing. But it's that mindset that you can always improve. I think a lot of people who don't have the innovator mindset, they look out there and they see competitors and they see roadblocks. The innovator sees opportunity. And the thing I say time and time again is that you don't have to be the first to do something. You don't have to be the only one to do it. You just have to think about how you can be the best.
Yeah.
And learn from others.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was working with a physician innovator the other day, and this specific topic came up where they had the perception that there was no competitors in the space that they wanted to play. And for them, that was a sure sign of success. And so they were really excited, like, we're gonna have to create the category. This is so wonderful. And it's like a shoe in, right? Because no one else is doing it. And so we had this conversation of like, whoa, creating a new category is not a bad thing. That could be a good thing, but it's also a very expensive thing, and it's a higher risk endeavor. And so we actually did a little bit of research, and we uncovered that sure enough, there actually is someone in that space. And I thought he was going to cry. And I was like, no, this is a good thing. This
Exactly.
justifies and validates your idea. There is a market for this thing. They've already done that work for you. You don't have to.
Yeah.
And so we started talking about, well, what it's like to be a second fast follower, and how, the pros and cons of that strategy versus being first to market. And he's like, oh, okay. All right. So this is a good thing. Yes, this is a good thing. I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah, but it's so true. Roxy, it's 100% spot on, because people have this mindset that they think I have to convince an investor that there's nobody else out there, so they'll back me because it means I have no competition. When in fact, we're all thinking, I wonder, it's either because there's no market, or you haven't done your homework and there's competition,
Right.
or it's not really a problem to be solved. That's
Right,
usually what
right.
we're thinking.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So speaking of a problem that no one's looking to solve, so what is your experience when you are working with someone who is extremely passionate about solving a problem and kind of gung-ho and moving fast and furious down this path, and investing significant resources in building out whatever that solution is going to be, and skipping that problem solution fit validation that's so critical to make sure that they're building something that someone actually cares about? What are
I
you doing in that situation?
I see it all the time. And I think part of that resilience and that desire to really say, I'm going to keep pushing despite the naysayers, and that self-confidence, that is fantastic. But what you don't want is to get into the arrogant side where you're operating in your own hype bubble. You're not pressure testing your ideas, and you just say, well, I know this is my plan. It's always been my plan. And I don't care what the people have told me as advisors, they don't know. Now, occasionally, there are naysayers out there, but I say that if you're getting advice from people who are just being negative, then you're not speaking to the right people. You want constructive criticism. You
Right.
want to pressure test your ideas. You want that feedback, and do the market research. I cannot tell you enough how many times I get people who come to me and say, I did a bit of Googling. I read a market research report. I know. It's like, did you talk to the payer providers? Did you talk to some of your competitors? Did you talk to other people in the field? Did you really test your idea? Do you really understand the market you're going for and your business model? Because you shouldn't be afraid of that criticism. In fact, you should be embracing it. You should be finding people who would criticize you
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
to improve your idea and to pressure test it. That's what you're looking for. Don't just surround yourself by maybe some loved ones who say, oh, that's wonderful, dear. It's a great idea. No, that doesn't help. Find people who will be
Exactly.
constructively critical and embrace them, and hire them if you can.
Yeah, yeah. And this is something that I talk a lot about too, which I'd love to get your opinion on. This mindset of, well, I did a customer discovery, we interviewed 12 people, and so we're good, versus this mindset of, and now, like, kind of just going back, and now we're moving on to something else, the next phase of this process, versus no, this is just who you are and what you do. And customer discovery, those types of interviews, those types of validation, until you actually reach product market fit, customer discovery is just part of your business operating protocol. And even when you get to product market fit, you're still doing customer discovery because it's discovering the next idea,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, but it's so true. It's like it should be fundamental and rigorous and continuous.
Yeah.
When I was launching research tools in my previous job to the market, we had to do that, and we had some really tough conversations from our, minimally viable product first salvo. They went, okay, well, this is nice, but it's too expensive, and it doesn't fit with this, it doesn't do that. And you go, thank you for that feedback. Let me go back, and we'll fix it, and we'll come back out again. You can't just say, because I know we had actually some, let's say, there's always that person or persons in the room who go, oh, those people, they don't know what they're talking about. Oh, the customers, if you ask them, they'll always give you some negativity and yada. You've got to filter that out. And
Right.
not all feedback is constructive feedback. So you need to be able to understand if somebody is telling you what they want versus what they need, or they're giving you good feedback that can translate into something else. And you can't just be superficial with it. It can't just be, well, I asked them, do they like A or B? And they told me A, so I'm making A. You go, well, really, did you understand what the problem was? Or did you
Right.
just trap them into giving you the answer that you wanted? So you've got
Yeah.
to be really careful about how you design those studies. But absolutely, it's continuous. It needs to be rigorous, and you have to make sure you do it honestly and constructively. Even with us as investors, we're always asking for feedback from the companies in our portfolio and from our board members, because we're constantly improving. And we say, well, we have this program for the accelerator. Is it working for you? Did that talk work or did this one not? Are we giving you the templates and support that you actually need that's beneficial? We need that feedback. I don't want to stick my head in the sand and say, we set out a program and here's how it is, and too bad if you don't like it. That doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I hear in resistance to what you just described often when I'm working with clients is, well, but who's going to pay for that? Like, that sounds really expensive. So who's paying for it? And how am I persuading my investors that they might be in, that I'm going to be using their money and resources to invest in all this market research instead of actually building out a product right now? So I think that sometimes because they haven't bought into it, it makes it really difficult for them to sell to their board or to sell to their investors on the justification of doing this first, to have that type of validation process. What do you say to that?
What I say to them is that you're saving yourself a lot of headache and heartache in the long run. Because essentially, if you really understand the unmet need you're addressing, then you're much more likely to develop a product that's going to have traction and actually bring in the revenue that you forecast. That crazy hockey stick we see in all those business plans, that doesn't just create itself overnight. There's a reason why most of those hockey sticks flatten out and become linear, because of poor product market fit, because you
Right.
didn't have the right question in the first place. So even if you have the right product, if it's the wrong need, the wrong, like it could be, how do you say, you could be developing a hammer and then trying to find a nail. You need
Always.
the other way
It
around
happens so often. Yeah.
all the time. So that's how you convince your investors. I say the same thing with team building. Factor that in early on. I was speaking to one of the leading executive recruiters in Europe just the other day, a friend of mine, and she was telling me how often people think of recruitment as an afterthought, team building, upskilling as an afterthought. Like, oh yeah, HR will sort that out. I guess we'll hire somebody. Factor that into your budget from day one. And
Yeah.
yes, a lot of executive recruiters, they do want their pound of flesh, but it's worth it. And take the time to get the right leadership in.
Mhm.
It'll save you the pain of having to completely cycle through leaders again and again and again until you get it right. It'll cost you more in the long run. So exactly the same thing for market
Yeah.
research. Invest in it clearly in the business plan, make it a priority, and invest in it early.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you this question. We've got thousands and thousands of accelerators and incubators, and we still have this pretty alarming failure rate of 95%, right, of innovations are brought to market fail. So what's happening from your perspective? If we've got more resources, more tools, more frameworks, more advisors, more of these accelerators and incubators than ever before, why aren't we moving the needle more?
I think a lot of it comes back to exactly what we were saying. It has to be a market pull. I think a lot of these programs, and no offense to them, some of them I call stagnators, and I don't mean that to be a mean thing, but there are a lot of stagnators out there where they think I have the resources to make available lab space and office space and mentors and all that. That's great. So come in, and then eventually, if the companies move on, the next one comes in, and it's like a business. But are they really being judged on metrics of how successful those companies are after they've gone through the program? And
Right.
also, are they selecting companies based upon the right criteria? Are they thinking these are companies that are going to be viable, or are they thinking these are companies who are available now who want to use my space and maybe pay my fees, etc.?
Right. Yeah.
So just because we're throwing good money after bad and putting more and more things in the pipeline doesn't mean on the other end we're going to get more successful products and better patient outcomes. We need to be doing it the opposite way around. All these accelerator programs should be tapping into the market researchers and tapping into the experts to begin with and saying, what is it that you actually need? All right, those are the programs and those are the companies I'm going to support because they have the likelihood of being successful, as opposed to You're a company. I'm sure we can help you find that nail. You're a hammer. Come on in.
Let's spend a year trying to find
Yeah, we'll figure it out. And then after that,
it.
you'll move on to the next one will come through. That's not, it doesn't help anyone.
Right. Yeah. So you kind of you've got your business in the UK, but you also have a foot in the US market as well. So kind of just describe some of the pros and cons, as innovators, as we kind of blur the lines of some of those regional or national global limitations, right, of geography. What are the pros and cons of launching an innovation in the UK versus the US? For our audiences that are trying to make a decision on what makes sense, especially, a market maybe they're more familiar with, like the US, that has a lot of bureaucracy still, a lot of challenges around reimbursement and regulatory, and then other markets that have more of a socialist healthcare system, and how that might be pros and cons for them to consider.
Definitely. So I'll kind of start from the bottom and build up. I think that there's world-class innovation in the UK, absolutely world-class. And obviously there's amazing innovations, from the likes of Harvard and Stanford, et cetera, all over the US as well. But the UK has a particularly high concentration of a handful of universities that are outstanding and always punch above their weight, like Oxford, Cambridge, UCL, Imperial, so on and so forth. So that means you've got amazing young talent, not necessarily with commercial experience, but very, very clever, and
Yep.
amazing IP as well. So
Mhm.
if you're looking for great technologies, historically, a lot of US companies come shopping in the UK. They in-license, they acquire early stage companies on the relatively cheap, which I'll come to in a second. And so it's a great hunting ground for innovation. Always has been, whether it be genomics, AI, whatever it may be, the UK is fantastic for that. The talent here is a lot more affordable than in the States. If you want to hire a team of bioinformaticians to work on your artificial intelligence company, it'll be a lot easier to grab them in the UK, and they'll be a lot more affordable than if you're in the States, where the competition is fierce and they're commanding higher salaries.
Yeah.
So just in terms of talent acquisition, a lot more affordable in the UK than the US. In the UK, unfortunately, there aren't as many experienced commercial leads for companies. So it's harder to recruit that side. You can grit the science side, but it's harder to find the BD and the kind of C-suite side. It's harder to secure financing because ultimately pre-money valuations here tend to be lower. There are more risk-averse VCs as a whole, I would say, in the UK compared to the States.
Okay.
The anecdote I give is when I was in my former company and I went and pitched in the UK, people would say, do you really need to raise 20 million? Couldn't you raise 15? And couldn't we tranche it? And are you really sure about this? And then I went to the States and they're like, why aren't you raising 100 million? You're trying to develop a diagnostic test. Don't you believe in what you're doing? And it's like night and day. Night and day. They're like, be aggressive. Why aren't you raising more? And in the UK, they're like, why are you raising so much? Raise a bit less. So things tend to be a bit more tortoise in the UK and a bit more hare, if I had to make a comparison.
Okay, that's a great analogy.
Yeah. So you kind of got to balance the two. In the US, if you go to an investor and you've got that passion and that vision, and we really know how to commercialize and pitch, you get that funding, you can bring in a healthy Series A raise, and then you can find the tech. In the UK, they're much more reserved. They're much more focused on slow and steady, really well-defined R&D development plans, and then a commercial strategy where eventually you will enter the US market. So final piece, when it comes to the social healthcare here, the NHS versus the States, you have that basically a monopoly for a single payer provider that you're going to. It's really great in terms of getting access to samples for developing tests, for finding a point for clinical trials. But if you want your product to make it into the NHS, they're very cost price sensitive, extremely so. On average, it takes about 17 years for a new innovation to be adopted by the NHS. So we're using tech that was deployed in the US decades ago. It's just now making its way into the healthcare system here.
Sure.
So a lot of companies in the UK use the social system here to develop their product, and then they launch in America. And then eventually it comes back to the UK.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And that's great. I'm so glad that you shared those insights. I think the viewers and the listeners will just really appreciate that. So I want to pick your brain a little bit more. So in your experience, what are the top 2 or 3 like most important considerations or strategies and tactics that you think ultimately can lead to commercial success?
So definitely, kind of recapping a bit of what we said, is definitely understanding the unmet need. You have to. You have to demonstrate when you pitch to me, or I think any really of the main credible investors, show me that you know it better than anybody else. You live and breathe that unmet need. You've done the research, you've done the homework, and you can tell me that whatever it takes, you are so passionate about it. That's the second thing. You demonstrate that you have that passion and relentlessness that you will deliver. And if that means you've got to bring in the tech or whatever it may be, or come up with a new business model, whatever it takes, you are determined you're going to make that difference. So you understand the need, you've got that determination and relentlessness. I would say that you've got to have the team. Mm-hmm. So once you've shown me those first two, show me that you can build that team that's going to execute on it. You have to be self-aware enough to know what your own personal gaps and limitations are. I'm not looking for somebody who is perfect. I'm looking for someone who's self-aware. So that's what I'm, right? I want someone that, I don't want someone to come to me and say, I'm all singing, all dancing. That's great. I want someone that comes to me and says, well, I've got a lot of business experience, but I'm a bit weaker on the science. But guess what? I've got a CSO who's fantastic on the science, and together we're going to make this happen. Or maybe I don't understand the clinical side, but I've got a chief medical officer, a clinical advisor who fills that gap. That's what I'm looking for.
So that is something that I don't think we even talk about enough. I mean, we often, I think, just as human beings, want to act like we have it all. We're the superhero innovators, especially if you're, in that early stage where you're a solo entrepreneur, or just early stage and you haven't, built the team yet. You want to just make up stuff as you go. Yep, got that covered, thinking that like there's no gaps makes more of an attractive offer, which I think is really the opposite in my experience. It's like, now you want to run for the hills. Right.
Yeah, it's so true. And even with the thing that the anecdote we were talking about earlier about the competitors, I want someone to come to me and says, right, I know my competitors inside and out. This is the market, this aspect's crowded. Here's a niche that needs addressing. I've got a solution for it. Here's my go-to strategy. I'm going to do what A, B, and C that they do well, but I'm going to change these aspects that they don't. That is right. You're a team that we can back. Yeah. But it's the honesty and that self-awareness is key.
Absolutely. So, Jason, I have had such a great conversation with you today. Thank you so much for being here. You've shared so much wisdom and insights with our audience. How can folks get a hold of you if they want to touch base with you after the show?
Roxy, thank you for having me. I love this so much. They can reach me at jason@startcodon.co. You can also find me on Twitter, Mellad. And please reach out on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. I know you're busy working to bring your life-changing innovation to market, and I value your time and attention. To get the latest episodes on your mobile device automatically, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate everyone who shared the show with friends and colleagues. See you on the next episode of Health Innovators.